Even in live view, the images in this page seem rather flat. To make them stand out better, they could do with a subtle drop shadow and maybe a faint border. Nothing too heavy, but just enough to lift them from the page. In the past, adding a drop shadow involved editing the image itself in a graphics program, or adding an offset background image of a shadow. That's no longer necessary thanks to the CSS3 box shadow property. I'm going to click on this image in live view, and that brings up in the properties pane of the CSS styles panel the properties for the float left class, which floats images to the left hand side of the current element. I'm going to apply the box shadow to this particular class, and then that will apply it to the image which is inside the class. Unfortunately, live view doesn't yet support the standard box shadow property, so you need to switch to the category view in the properties pane of the CSS styles panel. Categories view is accessed by clicking the far left icon at the bottom left of the CSS styles panel. And we need to go down to find the WebKit vendor-specific properties and find WebKit box shadow. There's a little icon there which I click to open a panel which lets me set the properties for the box shadow. Now, there are quite a few properties that you can set for box shadow. You can have an inset shadow. The X offset controls the horizontal position of the shadow. Positive values move it to the right, negative values move it to the left. The Y offset, that controls the vertical offset of the shadow. Positive values move it down, negative values move it up. You can also set a blur radius, that can only be a positive value, and spread radius spreads the shadow beyond the basic bounds of the original element. And the last one is colour. Now, even though it's last, it's the one that I'm going to select first, and the reason for that is because I want to be able to see the effect of the drop shadow as I make the adjustments to the X and Y offsets. So click the colour box here. The first thing that you need to do is to make sure that the colour format is either RGBA or HSLA. That gives you alpha transparency, and for a drop shadow you should normally have some transparency in the colour, otherwise it tends to look a little bit too heavy. I'm going to use RGBA and select black, and then start adjusting the X and Y offsets. Now, as I increase the X offset, you can see a black line is appearing on the right hand side of the image. The reason for this is that when you select RGBA or HSLA as the colour format in Dreamweaver, it automatically sets the opacity to be completely opaque. You have to change the opacity afterwards. So this is just giving me the idea of the extent of the shadow. Let's do the Y offset. I think we'll go for 3 pixels there, and maybe the blur radius, we'll put that at 5 pixels. Normally for a drop shadow, I don't think that you need to set the spread radius. I'll show you later in this video what the spread radius does. So just click away from that, and I need to just expand this a little bit more. And now adjust the amount of opacity in my colour. Change the last value to 0.3. Press enter, and you can see we've now got quite a nice subtle drop shadow on that image, and because it's applied to the class, it's applied automatically to this image too. Because I've used WebKit box shadow, I need to go to the code and add the vendor-specific prefix for Firefox, which is Moz, and also the standard property. So right-click, go to Code, and then I can copy and paste this property. I need 2 copies. Change the first one to Moz, and the last one to the standard property. This ensures that the drop shadow will be applied in all browsers that support drop shadows. As I mentioned earlier, you can create inset shadows and set the shadow's spread. Unfortunately, Live View in the Windows version of Dreamweaver CS55 doesn't render inset shadows correctly, so I'll show you the effect in Google Chrome instead. I've created 6 examples here. In the first one, the horizontal and vertical offsets are positive, so the shadow is to the right and down. In this one, the offsets are negative, so the shadow goes up and to the left. With an inset shadow, if it's positive, it's placed on the top and the left-hand side. That's because it's moving down and to the right. And the negative values for the inset one, the shadow is put on the bottom and on the right-hand side. With spread, if the spread is smaller than the horizontal and vertical offsets, it's actually hidden behind the box in the opposite direction. If it's greater, you see the spread in all directions, but it is actually pushed in the same direction as the offsets. So if you want it to be the same all round, you shouldn't have any offsets. So there you are. Using CSS to add drop shadows to images and other page elements is quick and easy with box shadow. Remember to use the WebKit vendor-specific prefix when applying box shadow in Live View. Then apply the Moz vendor-specific prefix and finish the style rule with the standard property to ensure that the effect is displayed correctly in all browsers that support drop shadows.